Now, Mordecai in chapter 4 hears about this, and he is beside himself. So he does what Jews do when they're in mourning. He tears his clothes, puts sackcloth on, ashes, and he goes out in the city, and he's just wailing and crying and moaning. But he only goes as far as the King's Gate, it says, because nobody in sackcloth is allowed to go past that. So he's there at the King's Gate, and he's telling all the Jews about this, and they are fasting and weeping and wailing. Meanwhile, Esther doesn't know anything about this, but some of her female attendants and eunuchs that were her servants, they knew that he was in mourning. So they come and they tell Esther, hey, Esther, there's something wrong with that guy down there, Mordecai. We don't know what's wrong with him, but boy, he's in sackcloth, he's got ashes on his head, and he's just wailing up a storm. And so she sends a set of clothes for him to put on. So, what are you doing in sackcloth? Put on some clothes and get yourself right. And he wouldn't do it. So she has another attendant go down and find out what's going on. She goes, go ask Mordecai what the problem is. So Mordecai lays the entire story out and says, Esther, you got to do something about this. We're going to get, the entire Jewish people are going to get wiped out in this. You're the queen. You've got the king's ear. You can do something about this. So this servant goes back and tells Esther all this, and Esther's like, does he not know the king? The king doesn't want anybody to come into his presence unless he calls them. If Dickie's the king, and I want to go see Dickie, and Dickie hadn't invited me, if I go just barging in and say, hey, Dickie, I need to have a word with you, that's punishable by death, right? And the only way around that is if Dickie is really, really glad to see me, he just hadn't called me in a while, he could take his scepter and point it out, and that would show acceptance, and my life would be spared, and then I would have an audience with the king. So Esther sends word to Mordecai. He's like, man, I can't do this because the king hadn't even called for me in 30 days. So, if I just go barging in there, I might die. Mordecai sends word back to her and says, you know what? We're in an existential crisis here. All of our people are going to die. He says, you know what? I know you think you're something up there as the queen, but don't think that you're going to escape from this. Just because they don't know you're a Jew now, they're going to figure it out sooner or later. And he says, we're all going to die, but even if you survive, it's going to be bad juju on you and your family. And he said, and who knows? Maybe you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And when I read this, now knowing that there's no mention of God, in my mind I automatically want to put in there, who knows? Maybe God put you here for this moment. Because I know that's what God did. And he says, so who knows that you might have been made the queen just for this purpose. So Esther tells Mordecai, okay, all right, tell you what, gather all the Jews in the city together and fast for me. For 3 days, don't eat or drink anything, day or night. Me and my attendants will do the same thing, and after those 3 days, I will go to the king, even if it means I lose my life. Or even if it's against the law. She goes, if I die, I die. So Mordecai, he goes away and fasts for 3 days, carries out all of Esther's instructions. So on the third day, Esther's finished, in chapter 5, she's finished fasting. She puts on her royal robes and she goes to the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king sees her. He's on his royal throne facing the entrance. He looks out and he sees Esther. He's like, is that you, Esther? And it's been about a month since I saw you. Why don't you come on in here? And so he's pleased with her, and he holds out to her that gold scepter that was in his hand, which indicates that she is now okay to come into his presence. So Esther goes in, and King says, what's on your mind? You look like you got something on your mind. You want something. I tell you what, whatever you want, even up to half my kingdom, ask me, and it'll be yours. And the queen says, you know what? If it pleases your highness, why don't you let me throw you a banquet today? Not just you, but you and Haman. Just you two guys. And I'll throw you this big old banquet. Now, remember, the king's a party guy. he likes a good party. He's like, go get Haman, man. Let's get this banquet underway, man. It's party time. And so the king and Haman go to this banquet that Esther prepared. They're drinking wine. And the king once again is asking, okay, we're here at the banquet. We're having some fun, eating, drinking. Now what is it? What's on your mind? What do you want? Once again, up to half the kingdom, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And she said, this is what I want, king. If I found favor in your eyes, give me this request. Come back, you and Haman, tomorrow for another banquet, and I'll tell you what I really want then. Hey, king's a party guy. He's like, sounds good to me. Another party? I don't have to cook. All right, we'll be there. And so, so they make plans to have that banquet the next day. Meanwhile, Haman goes out, and he's happy. I mean, this guy's in high spirits. He heads out to the king's gate. Who does he see there but Mordecai? Mordecai. Boy, I hate that guy. Of course, he goes out there, and everybody's bowing down. Oh, Haman, you're so good. You're the king's favorite. Boy, we're kissing your butt. Mordecai's like, I ain't going to kiss that guy's butt. And so Haman's like, man, I hate that guy. I'd snap his neck right here. He says, you know what? Never mind. I'm in a good mood today because the queen wants nobody but me and the king to go to this banquet. So he goes home and he calls his friends and he calls his wife. And he boasts to them about his vast wealth, everything he's got. It's like, man, I'm just so blessed. I got everything that I can ever, and that's not all. He said, I'm the only person that Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet that she gave today. And guess what? She invited me to come back tomorrow. Man, is there anybody greater in town than old Haman? I am awesome, right? He says, but you know what? As happy as I am over that, I get no satisfaction with it as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting down there at the king's gate, constantly refusing to bend his knee and give me my respect. So his wife and all his friends say, you know what? You really shouldn't have to put up with old Mordecai. Why don't you get a pole reaching up to about 70 feet, 5 feet high. And why don't you stick it out there and then have in the morning, go and ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. Haman said, you know what? Man, y'all give good advice. Once again, a fool should not go to another fool for advice. He said, yeah, that's a great idea. I'll just get rid of old Mordecai. And so he has this pole set up. So the next morning, back up, chapter 6. Remember I told you that this story that was written down in the royal records would be important? That very night, once again, I see God's hands at work in all this. That very night, King Xerxes is laying in bed, tossing and turning. He's like, man, I don't know if it was the chili I had for dinner or what, man. A little I can't sleep. He said he couldn't sleep, so he says, you know what always makes me sleepy? Reading a good history book. Somebody bring me the royal records and read me some stuff out of it until that boring stuff puts me to sleep. And so they bring in the book of Chronicles, the royal records of his reign, and starts reading to him. And as they're reading to him, they recount this story about Mordecai uncovering this plot on the king's life. And the king's like, yeah, I remember that. Who was that guy again? Mordecai, right? Yeah, King Mordecai. Yeah, he's uncovered it. What did we ever do for that guy? Did somebody send him a thank you card? No, King, I don't think anybody did anything. He says, you know what? Man, who's around? I need to get somebody to go thank this guy. Is there anybody outside? The guys look out the window. About that time, Haman comes walking through. He's like, man, your right-hand man, Haman's down there. It's like, hey, call him up here. I got a job for him. So brings Haman up, and Haman says, well, King, what can I do for you? King says, hey, Haman, I got this guy that I really, really need to do a solid for. I want to show my appreciation for him. Haman, if you were me, what would you do to show his appreciation? Haman's like, man, there ain't nobody he can be talking about me. The king wants to honor me. He said, boy, I'm going to lay this on because I'm going to get mine now. He's like, all right, King, here's what I would do. If I was you and I wanted to honor somebody, well, I would take a robe that you had worn and I'd put it around his shoulders. Not only that, I would put him on a horse that you had ridden. One of your very own horses. Put him on it. And then I'd have one of your trusted servants guide that horse through town with the guy you want to honor on that horse's back and just proclaim it to everybody. Man, this guy is so great. The king just loves this guy. Now remember, in Haman's mind, it's going to be Haman on top of that horse. The king's like, Haman, that's a great idea. Man, right now I want you to go get Mordecai, and I want you to do everything for Mordecai that you just talked about. Haman's like, Mordecai, I hate that guy. But you know what? The king has said, so he goes out, he does all this for Mordecai, and he even goes through town saying, hey guys, look, this is what's done for the man that the king delights to honor. Afterwards, Mordecai goes back to the king's gate. Haman goes home, got his head covered up in shame. He's like, man, I can't believe it. Mordecai, I hate that guy. And he goes and he tells his wife and his friends everything that's happened. And his advisors and his wife says, oh, Mordecai, gosh, that guy. Yeah, he's a Jew, isn't he? He said, since he's of Jewish origin, you can't stand against him. Once again, we, dear readers, read into this, because he is a child of God, because God's on his side, there ain't nothing you can do. Your downfall has already started. Surely you will come to ruin. And this is his own wife and his friends telling him this. And I'm sure he's saying, you know what? You probably should have told me that yesterday instead of now, before I made a fool of myself here. While they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and says, Haman, hey man, we got a party to go to. Ain't you forgot that Esther's throwing that party? Yeah. So off they go. The king and Haman are at Esther's banquet. They're drinking wine on the second day. The king once again says, Queen Esther, all right, this is the second party you've thrown. You've got something on your mind. You want something. What can I do for you? Even up to half the kingdom, whatever you want, I'll give you. Queen Esther says, look, king, grant me my life. And I'm sure the king's like, what you talking about, Queen Esther? Grant me my life. Not only that, the life of my people. This is my request. She said, me and my people have been sold out to be destroyed, killed, annihilated. Now, king, I'm going to tell you what. If we were just to be sold off as male and female servants, I wouldn't even bother with you. I mean, even that's not enough to bother the king with. But, this is my life and the life of my people we're talking about. King Xerxes says, who is threatening your life? Where is he? Where's the man that has dared to do such a thing? So his blood is starting to rise and he's getting angry about this. And Esther says, that guy, Haman, right there. That's the guy. Boy, Haman's like, what? The king, Haman was terrified. The king gets up in a fit of rage, goes outside to the royal garden to cool off a little bit. Meanwhile, Haman's like, Queen, I'm so sorry. You know the king's going to kill me over this. Please don't let the king kill me. He's begging for his life. She's sitting on the couch. He throws himself on the couch, begging for his mercy. About the time the king cooled off, comes back in, and sees this man on the couch with his wife. He's like, I just went outside and he's going to molest the queen right here? Are you serious? He's like, that's it. We've got to do something about this. He says, as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then one of the eunuchs that was attending the king says, oh, hey, king, guess what? I know where there just happens to be a pole about 75 feet high. It's right outside old Haman's house. He had it set up to kill Mordecai, the guy that you saved your life one time. Oh, really? So how convenient there's a pole. Why don't you just go and put old Haman on top of that pole? And so they impaled Haman on the very pole that he had set up for Mordecai. And then the king's fury subsided. Now, the king, obviously now Haman's got an estate that he doesn't need. So the king gives all that to Queen Esther. And Mordecai comes into the presence of the king because Esther then reveals to the king that they're related, that she's Jewish. Let's see. The king takes off his signet ring again. You'd think this fool would learn by now not to give your royal pin to somebody. And he gives it to Mordecai. And Esther appoints Mordecai as chief over Haman's estate. Well, we still have, we think we got the problem solved, but we still have the bigger problem, that there is this decree that's out there that on the 13th day of the 12th month, that people are going to rise up and start killing Jews throughout the land. We've somehow got to resolve that. And so Esther again pleads with the king, falling at his feet, begging him, please put it into this plan that Haman put into action. And the king says, well, how do you propose we do that? She says, why don't we just put together a decree that overrides or supersedes that last one, except, and I'm not sure that it's historically accurate, but in the story as we're told here, a royal decree in Persia could not be superseded. So once the king spoke, he spoke. Remember, Daniel in the lion, it was the same thing in Babylon, under the Babylon era. Remember when the king was tricked to throw Daniel into the lion's den? The king didn't want to throw Daniel into the lion's den. Actually, you don't know that story. We haven't got to the story yet. I mean, we know the story, but we haven't got to it yet in here. But the king, you'll see when we get there, doesn't want to throw Daniel in there, but the king had already been tricked into making a decree that anybody that worships anybody but the king has to be thrown to the lions. Daniel was guilty of worshiping God instead of the king. The king's like, I can't go back on it. It's a royal decree. You got to go in the lion's den. But hey, I hope God gets you out of this one there, Daniel. So in this setting, this decree is, they can't take it back. So what they come up with is, they come up with this decree that yes, on the 13th day, it is still legal for everybody to rise up and attack the Jews, but guess what? Now there's a royal decree that goes out and says, hey, you can attack the Jews if you want, but they're going to be able to defend themselves. And if they kill you, they're going to get all of your estate. You know, everything that you own is going to be theirs. And so this decree goes out throughout the land, and it sets us up for a battle between the Jews and their enemies. Because not every Persian is going to be against the Jews. It'll only be a small number of people that will rise up against the Jews. So on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. Well, the author doesn't tell us that God is with the Jews, but we know that already. So how do you think this story is going to come out? The Jews absolutely rout all of their enemies. They kill all the enemies that come up against them. But the one thing they don't do is, even though the king has decreed that they are allowed to plunder their enemies after they annihilate them, they don't touch any of the plunder. And in the town of Susa, which is the royal town where King Xerxes and Queen Esther live, they rout the enemies of the Jews there as well. Well, they, Queen Esther, boy, I tell you, she turned evil in Arby. Not evil, but really mean in Arby. So they report back to the king of how many casualties there were that day that the Jews inflicted upon the Persians. And they get the number, and then Queen Esther says, hey, I got another favor to ask you, king. He's like, well, what you need? He says, if it pleases the king, let's give the Jews in Susa one more day. Let us give one more day to annihilate some more Persians. He says, all right, let's go ahead. And also let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles. So, which is in keeping with what God has done throughout history with the Jews is, if somebody goes up against the Jews, then usually the whole male side of the family is annihilated. So, and so he allows it to go. So for 2 days in the town of Susa, the Jews wreak havoc on their enemies of Persia, and they still don't take any of the spoils of war. Let's see. So, about the middle part of chapter 9, they tell us that is why the rural Jews, or Jews living in villages, observe the 14th of the month as a day of joy and feasting. It leads to the one festival, Jewish festival that I know of. There may be more, but this is at least the first one that I know of that is not ordained by God, because remember, there is no mention of God in the book of Esther. This is the festival of Purim, based off the Pur, the P-U-R. It is a 2-day festival that the Jews celebrate to commemorate this great deliverance of theirs. But once again, we never name who the deliverer is. And I know that it is specifically intentional that the author has let it out, but we're invited to see the hand of God at work throughout this entire story. So they established this custom. So they observe these 2 days every year at the appointed time. So, and then last but not least, so Mordecai has come from being just a guy that hangs out by the king's gate, a foreigner in the land, to somebody that saves the king's life, convinces the queen to save all of the Jews' life, and now he is lifted up to a position of greatness by the king. So he is a foreigner, he's a Jew, and he ends up being lifted up and given a second in rank only to the king. Now, doesn't that sound like another story we've heard from the Old Testament? Remember a Jewish foreigner down in Egypt? He was a prisoner at one point, old Joseph, elevated up to second only behind the Pharaoh. And this is, I'm quite certain, is intentionally meant to mirror that story in Genesis to show God's hand of prevenient. God's will is always done, no matter what human things happen. God is always able to pull a few strings here or there and get things to work out exactly the way God wants it to, for his people, for his purposes. And so that, my dear friends, closes out the book of Esther, the only book in the Bible that has not one single mention of God.
Well, it wasn't blatantly mentioned.
Exactly.
It was there.
I see the same thing, and I can't understand why the Jewish rabbis and stuff would even argue about that.
Right.
They're smart enough; they should have seen that too. But yeah, it was a hullabaloo centuries ago about it. Oh man, I tell you, what a great story, though, right?
Absolutely. Chapter 10 must be the shortest chapter in the Old Testament.
it might be. Yeah, it's only a few.
What a good story.
Yeah.
You are such a good storyteller.
Yeah. You really are.
Oh, well, you know what? It makes it easy when I got a good story to tell. You wait until I get some more of the boring stuff, and you'll be like, man, where's that good storyteller at? We'll pick up next week with the book of Job. That's another great story. That one's a little harder to tell because a lot of it's written poetry, but we'll move through the story of Job real quickly. The first part's a great story, and then we get into his responses and his three chuckle-headed friends' responses, and then finish out with God coming in and saying, having a word. I love God's response to Job. Where were you, Mr. Job, who wants to talk so big and bad, when I laid the cornerstones of the universe? Love it. So we'll get into that story. Any questions or comments or insights about Esther before we scratch out of here? God is good. I'm glad he's on my side most days. Hey folks, remember to click the subscribe button below and ring the bell to be notified when we post new content. And as always, if today's video touched you in some way, please hit the thumbs up button and leave us a comment. We love to hear how our content impacts your walk with Jesus Christ. Until next time, God bless.